Every month or so, I do a video like this where y'all ask me a bunch of questions and I answer them. I'm going to answer questions like, is buying an eBay store subscription worth it? Where I source my bulk buys, my favorite sandwiches, how to handle returns, whether ending and relisting is worth it, and of course, what my top sale of all time is. And I've got a ton of questions to answer, so I'm not going to waste any time. What is the minimum margin you'll take on an item to determine whether it's worth picking up or not? So I don't really think of it that way, to be honest. I don't really think of it in terms of margin. It's more of an art than a science, honestly. I tend to look at the active listing price. I tend to look at the total number of active listings. I look at the sold listing price. I look at the total number of sold listings. I don't do like hard math in my head. I just sort of like get a feel for it. If there's 800 active listings and only 20 of them sold, I'm probably not going to buy something like that unless the return on it is going to be really significant, unless the margin is going to be really, really great. But if the sell-through rate is very good and I'm only going to make $10 or $15, like I might actually pick that up if it's easy to ship. And so there's all these different factors that come into play when I'm trying to decide whether to buy something or not. It's not strictly just margin, it's sell-through rate, it's ease of storage, it's ease of shipment, it's how fast it's going to sell, how much money it's going to bring. All those things kind of come together to give me an idea of whether I should buy it or not. All right, I have 20 items listed and I have posted at least one per day for almost 3 weeks. Nothing is sold yet. I'm trusting the process and being patient. At what point do I decide if my items are the issue or due to not having a selling history or both? What amount of time, days, weeks, months, do you suggest is normal to wait for a first sale? I'm also using Flipwise and has been very useful so far. Thank you. Great. Thanks for using Flipwise. That's awesome. It totally depends on what you're selling. So everything that you sell has a sell-through rate. It has, and this doesn't need to be a mystery. You can check this. You can look it up. Or you take an item and you check the number of active listings that it has. You take that same item and check the number of sold listings that it has and compare those two. That's going to be your sell-through rate. eBay history, search history goes back 90 days. If there are 90 of those items that were sold, that means that one sells basically once every day. If there's 9,000 listed, then that means there's 9,000 competitors out there and only one of them sells per day. So yours is going to take a long time to sell. And so your question is like, at what point do I decide if my items are the issue? Like right now, you can look and see, are my items the issue? You check your sell-through rate and you look and see how many sell per day. And so take any one of those items, check the sales history for it and see how many have sold. If there's like 600 that have sold and there's 100 listed, then something's going on. Like something's wrong with your listing in particular. Maybe it's priced wrong. Maybe there's condition issues. Maybe their pictures are wrong or bad. But you don't have to guess at all. So go through your inventory, check the sell-through rate, see how many you're selling, and that'll give you an idea and help you set your expectations on how long it will take an item to sell. What amount of time do you suggest is normal to wait for a first sale? So there's really no normal there. It totally depends on what you're selling. You could, as a brand new seller, have an item that has an incredible sell-through rate, list it and have it sell in an hour. But you could also be a brand new seller and have an item that has a really poor sales history and you could wait 6 months for it to sell. So it just totally depends on what you're selling. Now that you're reselling full-time, are you spending more time sourcing? If so, are you going to thrift stores more on particular days that might be more stocked? So I'm actually not reselling full-time. I did quit my full-time job back in December, but reselling still is a part-time thing for me. I also spend my time on YouTube. I spend less time on YouTube than I do on actual reselling. And then most of my time is taken up by a separate venture that I'm running, which is Flipwise, which is the software product that I co-founded with a friend of mine to help manage your eBay inventory and sales data and automate your reselling business. And so that's the bulk of my time. I consider that my full-time job. And then, reselling and YouTube are kind of secondary jobs on the side. You asked if so, are you going to thrift stores more? I am going to thrift stores more. I'm spending more time on reselling than I did when I had a traditional full-time job where I wasn't self-employed. But so I'm going to thrift stores more for sure. I have a separate video on thrift stores in particular. I'll link that up top and down below. I don't really go on particular days. I don't have a set schedule. I just kind of go where my gut tells me to go. And thrift stores are all just different with how they handle their inventory when they put things out. Some thrift stores are going to be more stocked on certain days and others. It's really like very dependent on the individual thrift store, but I talk about that in that other video, so you should check that out. All right, I would like to know where you source your massive buys with multiples of the same item, specifically the Kohler return palette and the Nike clothing. I enjoy sourcing a mountain of one thing and then focusing on listing that. Me too. If I could get more of that type of high quality inventory at scale, I definitely would. The way that I get that sort of inventory is through personal connections that I've found found in my reselling ventures. I'm out there reselling. I talk to people. I tell them what I'm doing. And I've made connections that have given me the opportunity to buy large amounts of inventory in that way. And so I'm not buying off like liquidations.com or HighBid or anything like that. Maybe you can. Maybe those are good places to buy that type of inventory, but I'm getting it through a personal connection. It was just somebody that I met on Facebook. I bought something from this woman on Facebook. It turns out she also is a reseller dealing with liquidation and things like that and has access to that sort of inventory. And so I go through her to get that whenever she has that type of thing available, which is not often, but sometimes. All right, what category or specific item seems the most tempting to you on the shelf at the thrift store, but isn't quite worth the squeeze, and why? That's a really good question. So I think one thing that comes to mind is coffee mugs. Like, I just personally like collecting coffee mugs. In fact, I don't know if you can see that behind me. That shelf right there has a bunch of coffee mugs on it. I have coffee mugs all over the house. I just like buying them. I like collecting them. And so I have a soft spot for them. They usually do not sell for much money. They're usually not worth picking up, but I really have a hard time passing on a really cool coffee mug because I list it and I put it on my shelf. But some coffee mugs do really well. I've sold coffee mugs, in the hundreds, many hundreds of dollars for a single coffee mug. So there are some really valuable ones out there, but to use your words, they're usually not worth the squeeze. Another one that comes to mind are like keyboards, like computer keyboards. Sometimes they have a decent amount of value, like $15, $20, $25, but they always end up being more expensive to ship than you want. Or they're a Logitech and they don't come with a dongle and you don't realize that until you get home. Things like that. It's just not really worth the squeeze, but some computer keyboards do really well. And so it's a category I look out for, but typically just are not worth the squeeze. All right, where are your best places to source in St. Louis? In St. Louis and county, there's a lot of upper class, middle class, and lower class areas. Which areas do you target when sourcing at garage sales, or you just see what areas have them and go from there? So I source in a lot. I am from St. Louis. I source from a lot of thrift stores around the area. I go kind of all over, depending on the day or my mood or what I'm looking to buy. And so I do end up in West County quite a bit. I end up in South County a lot. I end up a little bit up north sometimes, depending on where I want to go. For garage sales, I usually stick around where I live. There's just some well-worn garage sale paths that I have that I can just drive down a few main streets, and there's always going to be garage sales kind of splintered off of those streets. Very rarely do I venture out to other parts of the city or county where I don't live for garage sales. I just know those areas less, and I spend more time driving than I want to. And so I usually just stick around the areas where I know the most. Okay, I could really use a video on handling returns. Most of what I have found are videos charged with emotion, assuming the return to be a scam. A clean, even-keeled video on the subject would be great. Different scenarios from buyer's remorse, honest mistakes in my listing, and actual scams. Tips for keeping the sold item sold as well would be great. So yeah, that might be a good topic for a video. I'll just say, like, on returns, I have I offer free returns and I offer like no questions asked returns. So I always put that in my listing. This is really just to alleviate any sort of pressure and anxiety from myself about returns. Returns are going to happen. If you're selling online, they're going to happen. If you're constantly getting anxious or upset when you get a return, like this is not going to be fun at all for you. And so I offer free returns. Or somebody's like, I want to return something. I'm like, cool, do it. Send it back, whatever. I don't care. That's the way I would recommend you do it. Don't give too much thought into whether somebody's trying to scam you or not. Scams, of course, do happen. Return scams do happen, but they are very, very, very infrequent. I can count on like one hand how many times I've actually had a return scam where somebody returned something entirely different than what I had. Every single time eBay's backed me and covered the cost, and I've never lost money on it. And so it's just really a non-issue. So I just assume that I'm going to get between 1% and 3% of the inventory that I sell is going to be returned. So yeah, maybe I'll do a video on the entire subject of returns. That might be a good idea. I'll think about that. All right. Do you think buying a store subscription would pay for itself, if not more? Like, will it get me at least an extra $21 in profit each month? To be honest, I don't know all of the benefits of a store subscription. I know that it gives you a larger allotment of listings. And so if you run out of your allotment of listings, eBay is going to charge you an insertion fee. I think it's like 30 or 35 cents per listing. If you have a store subscription, you don't get charged that. And so if you're listing a lot of inventory, so much so that you're constantly getting charged those insertion fees, it's probably the number one reason why you'd want to get a store. That also goes for like ending and relisting. I think there's another question on here about ending and relisting, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I do a lot of ending and relisting, so I'll just mass end like 500 listings and then relist them to refreshen their presence in the eBay algorithm. I find a lot of success with that, and so I want to have a buffer, enough free listings from eBay through the store so that I don't have to worry about being charged 35 cents for that. Because if you were doing a mass end and relist and you were charged 35 cents per end and relist, that would be a huge amount of money. And so for me, the store pays itself in that regard, as I can just list as many as I want. Okay, a few questions. Where do you get packing materials and boxes in St. Louis? Louis. What are your most used box sizes and mailer sizes? Any updates on Flipwise being available if we signed up for it? So I'll start with the boxes in St. Louis. So I use a box supplier. Sometimes I buy boxes online just through eBay, like through the Boxery or one of those places on eBay. Other times I will go local. If I'm buying a ton of boxes, there's a place, I can't remember, I'll link it in the description below. It's something generic like St. Louis Paper and Box Supply or something. It's up north, but it's nice. You can just go pick it up. You don't get charged any shipping fees on it, but you do have to buy quite a bit to make that make sense. The prices are pretty good though, and they're comparable to Uline and places like that, but you don't have to pay for shipping, so it ends up being a lot cheaper. As far as poly mailers and sizes of boxes, just off the top of my head, like 8x6x4, 10x6x8, 12x12x9, 12x12x4, 18x16x6. Those are all common box sizes that we use, pretty regularly. In terms of poly bags, I usually only keep 1 or 2 sizes of poly bags on hand. That's like a 9x12 and then like a 16x9, a slightly wider one or slightly longer one. And I'll occasionally buy some padded poly mailers using like the store credit that I get from eBay. Usually those are like 9x6 or 9x12. Any updates on Flipwise being available if we signed up for it? So if you signed up to be a beta tester, chances are you probably have already gotten an invite. If you haven't gotten an invite, check your spam folder. I've noticed some people think that they haven't gotten an invite, but they check their spam folder and there it is. So check your spam folder if you've signed up to be a beta tester but have not gotten an invite. Otherwise, we'll be open to the public relatively soon. We're still in the beta phase. We're still fixing a lot of bugs and bringing out new features, but we expect to be out of beta in late March is our goal. So we keep moving it back a little bit. We just want it to be good by the time we get it out there for mass public consumption. So coming soon for sure. All right. When you list and sell something personal and you have no idea how much it costs, should your cost of goods be zero? This is a great question. This comes up all the time. It's more of a tax question. And so this is not tax advice. I am not a tax expert. You should definitely consult with a tax expert, but it really depends on a lot of factors. I think some people just put zero for the cost of goods, but a lot of folks will get like the fair market value of what the cost is based on, I don't know, a number of factors. So if you bought something in 1986 for $200, there's some way to calculate a fair market value of that item today, and you would put that in instead. The reason you might do that is you can lower your taxable income by giving it an appropriate cost. And so your net return will be lower, your income will be lower, and thus your tax will be lower. So it really is up to you. You could also just put zero and consider it all profit, but then you're probably paying more taxes on it than you should. But again, I'm not a tax expert. You should definitely ask a tax expert because they're going to give you a way more accurate answer than I can. All right, what are your top 3 sandwiches of all time? That's a great question. I don't know if I can name 3. I'll name one though. My favorite sandwich of all time is from Joya's Deli here in St. Louis, the hot salami. So that is by far the best sandwich on planet Earth. I will say a close second would be a muffaletta from Central Grocery in New Orleans. So those are the 2. Maybe I could think of a third. I don't know. Well, anyway, we'll leave it at 2. Those are the 2 best ones. How about a video discussing how you determine pricing for your finds? I found it frustrating to list an item like TI-84, for example. My pricing is close to the average, including shipping, and a top-rated seller with 100% feedback. Why did my item sell before the other, which were listed at a higher price? So this is a great topic. I actually have one video where I discuss some of this stuff and some of my thoughts on this. It's called the eBay pricing problem, so I'll link it up here and down below. That talks a lot about the challenges of finding the right prices and how to price your item on eBay. It's just not simple at all. It's more of an art than a science. There's another video that I really want to make, but I have not made yet, and that is to your second point on it, which is like, why did my item not sell if it was priced lower? And the reality is eBay has a lot more control over when you get sales than you might think. And so this is all nested in the eBay algorithm. Nobody knows how it works except for eBay themselves. I don't know how it works, but I have my theories on it. And so, for example, even if you have your TI-84 competitively priced and it doesn't sell, it's probably because the eBay algorithm is not giving preference to your listing at the time when that person is buying. And so they have a lot of control over where in search results your listing is going to show up when somebody searches TI-84. And whether someone buys or not has a lot to do with where it shows up in search results. And so eBay has a lot of the ability to control who gets sales and when, and there's a lot of factors that determine when that happens. And again, I don't know it for sure. I don't work for eBay, but I have a lot of theories on that. I'll probably do a separate video on that because it's really interesting, and I think there's a lot to be said there. All right, how do you figure out shipping costs when listing without prepackaging your inventory? So another good question. So some people prepackage their inventory, so they buy something and they list it, and they put it in the box right away so they know how much to charge for shipping. And you can certainly do that, but it does add a lot of extra time to the listing process. And the more time it takes to list something, the less you're going to be able to list. And eBay is all about listing. And so I personally do not prepackage anything before I list it or when I list it. I just package it when it sells. But it does mean you have to have a good idea of what the weight and size of that box will eventually be when you ship it. And really, this is just something that you learn over time with experience. And so when I first started, I was much more rigorous with weighing and measuring and making sure that I knew how much it was going to cost to ship. Now I just know. I just know roughly what size box something's going to go in, roughly how much it's going to weigh, and I know the max amount that I'm going to pay to ship that to the furthest place that my shipping business policies allow. For example, the most expensive shipping from where I'm at here in St. Louis is always going to be to Oregon or Washington State. Somewhere on the upper or Pacific Northwest is always going to be the most expensive. And so I sort of use that as a frame of reference for what the maximum cost to ship will be. And I price things accordingly. I don't use calculated shipping, so that changes things. And so I think if you use calculated shipping, you do have to be a little bit more specific, or else your buyer is going to get charged a lot more or less to ship something than it actually is going to cost, which can be problematic. The reason I don't use calculated shipping is because I like my listings to be competitive on price. And so if I use calculated shipping, it may quote for the buyer a much higher shipping cost than it'll actually be. And a buyer really cares about their all-in price, how much the item costs plus how much the shipping is going to cost. And so if they're being quoted $100 on something that's going to cost $20 to ship, they're likely not going to buy from me. And so I either do free shipping and I build the cost to ship into the total purchase price, or I do flat shipping and I just have some tiers of flat shipping prices that I select based on the individual item. And so I have like a $6.99 flat shipping, I have a $9.99 flat shipping, I have a $14.99 flat shipping, I have a $19.99 flat shipping, I have a $24.99 flat shipping. And so depending on where in the range that's going to land, I will pick that flat shipping option, or like I said, just do free shipping and build it into the cost. But at the end of the day, I think shipping just trips a lot of new sellers up. And the way I think about it is that as a buyer, you're paying one amount. It doesn't matter whether you're paying $1 for the item and $99 to ship, or $99 for the item or $1 to ship, or $100 for the item with free shipping. The buyer is going to pay a specific amount no matter what. An item has a specific value regardless of how much it costs to get it from A to B. And so when I think of the value of something, if I'm going to sell this mouse right here, this mouse has a value. It is not going to be worth more than $16. And so I know that this thing is going to be light, and I know it's not going to cost a whole lot to ship. And the market value for it is $15. So if I want to sell it to somebody, I'm going to price it at $15, whether that's $15 in free shipping or $10 and $5 in shipping or $7.50 and $7.50 in shipping. Just really doesn't matter. It's going to have a market value regardless. Sometimes you're going to get burned on shipping if somebody far away picks your item. Sometimes you're going to make more money if someone close to you buys the item. And so that's just the way I do it. It's not for everyone. I end up leaving money on the table for sure. I end up getting more money sometimes for sure. I think it evens out roughly. But the one thing that's really important is it allows me to list super fast. And that's my number one thing. I just want to be listing as fast as I possibly can, as much as I possibly can. So I try to remove as many barriers as I can from that listing process. And so that's why I don't prepackage any of my stuff. All right, how do you track your inventory after listing an item to know where it is once it sells? So this is part of what my product Flipwise does, is it allows you to input your storage location. So you say, oh yeah, I'm listing this mouse, I'm putting it in the bin A1A, and so I go back into Flipwise after it's listed and I give the storage location A1A. Once it sells, then Flipwise tells me hey, this mouse just sold, it's located at A1A, go get it, and then you ship it. So that's how I do it. You could also use a spreadsheet or really anything. You write on a piece of paper if you want. Okay, next one. Would you list $10 with low sell-through or less items you have, or source better stuff? If I already had an item that was worth $10 and it has a low sell-through rate, I might list it if I have no other inventory. I'm definitely not going to buy something that's only going to net me $10 and it has a low sell-through rate and going to take forever to sell. I'm just going to go find different and better inventory. But if I had it laying around, I might list it. All right, next, if you've been a buyer on eBay for a while and have tons of positive feedback on that side, does that translate in any way to help the algorithm when you begin listing as a seller? Maybe, I don't know. I just don't, nobody knows how the algorithm works. I would assume that it does play some role in the placement of your listings in search, which is generally what defines your ability to sell something, is where your item is going to show up in search. eBay is probably more likely to promote listings from sellers that are trusted than they would if they were untrusted. Again, I'm speculating, I have no idea, but I don't think feedback plays as big of a role as most sellers think. I think it is secondary to a lot of other things. Also, I seem to be stuck right now. I feel like I need to be organized enough to hit the ground running so that I list 5 to 7 items per day right away just to kickstart the algorithm for me so my listings show closer to the top. Sure. Am I even correct in thinking this will help? Yeah, I think you're definitely correct in thinking this will help. And I do need to do a separate video on this. Consistency is key. Really, eBay, if you're inconsistent, it is not going to consistently give you sales. Like if you're consistent, it's going to consistently give you sales. And so if you're just like listing one thing on one day and then waiting 3 weeks and listing 3 things and then waiting 4 weeks and listing one thing, like it's just, eBay is going to respond accordingly by not giving you many sales. Instead, if you're listing 5 things every day, like you're going to establish a baseline for expectations from the eBay algorithm. To expect this many listings out, eBay eventually is going to start giving you that many sales, assuming you're listing things that actually have a decent sell-through rate. But yeah, being consistent it's all about being consistent. That's the number one thing you need to do. All right. I would like to ask the differences between eBay, Poshmark, and Merari. I've only started on eBay. Not sure if it's worth doing the others as well. Would you cross-post on them? So I don't do any cross-listing right now. I know there's software that does cross-listing. We're going to build cross-listing into Flipwise eventually. I don't focus on it right now because I was not really happy with any of the tools out there, and it's way too hard to cross-list everything manually, especially if you have a decent size store like I do. And so I don't do any cross-listing. Merari is kind of like a smaller eBay. Some people have a lot of success there. Like I've sold things here and there, but I don't do it with any sort of regularity. Poshmark is way more focused on clothing. And so if that's the category you sell in, it is probably a good idea that you consider selling on Poshmark as well. I really only sell on eBay. That's my main focus. And I don't know a whole lot about the other platforms. What's the best sale you've ever had? And what's the worst and most costly mistake as a reseller? So I don't know. I can just look this up here. So the best sell I've ever had, I'm just going to go into Flipwise here and sort by net return the opposite way. So yeah, the best one I've ever had is this Swiss made clock that I paid $130 for, and it sold for $1,224, and my net return was $866. Looks like I had a Department 56 Dr. Seuss Grinch Village that sold for $576 net return, another Department 56 Dr. Seuss for $504. By the way, I got those at the same garage sale. I had 3 of them, and I made about $1,500 net on one garage sale. It was pretty amazing. So yeah, that's the best sell I've had. What was the other question here? What's your worst and most costly mistake as a reseller? I don't know. Let's just look at net return on the opposite. Yeah, so I'm just looking at the stuff here. Like this was off a Amazon return pallet. I don't like doing Amazon return pallets. Like sometimes I guess they're good, but the ones that I have bought end up having a lot of broken stuff on it. Here's another question on returns. I hear you talk all the time about offering hassle-free returns. Do you mean that you're checking the box that says the seller, you, pay for shipping on all returns? Doesn't that mean that if an item ever gets returned, that I'm eating the return cost, or is that not a big deal to have the buyer pay return shipping? Yeah, so I do hassle-free returns. That does mean free returns. That means if anyone wants to return something for any reason, I pay as the seller the return costs on that. And I do that because I think that's what buyers expect these days. I think Amazon has set the bar for that, like it or not. So I do it. I think it's a good customer service thing. The fact is, even if you don't accept returns on eBay, or even if you require that the buyer pays for the returns on eBay, they can still return something, and they can still return it in a way that requires you to pay for it. And so I just say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and offer free returns, and that way I get the benefits of offering it as well. And it really doesn't impact my return rate at all. I usually hover between 1% and 3% on returns. I believe you talked about this before, but I don't remember correctly. I woke up to an item hasn't arrived case on eBay when it shows it was delivered. I messaged the buyer saying the tracking number and shows it was delivered. What do I do from here? So you're good. As long as the tracking shows delivered, your job as a seller on eBay is done. Doesn't matter what the buyer says. If somebody stole it off their porch, that sucks, but it's not your fault. There's nothing you can do about it. You're probably halfway across the country. You have no jurisdiction in where they live. You can't do anything. So you're good. As long as it shows delivered on the tracking, that's why it's so important to have tracking on everything you sell on eBay. As long as that shows delivered, there's nothing you need to do. And they could open up a case and do all sorts of things, but eBay will side with you. So, okay, last one here. Would love to know more about how you go about deleting and reposting items items if there's any benefit to it. I've also heard this can negatively impact your seller rating. Is this true, and does it matter? So yeah, I do a lot of ending and relisting. It's a very important thing, I think. And it depends on who you ask. Some people will say that it doesn't impact anything, but my personal opinion and my own anecdotal evidence shows that ending and relisting is a very helpful thing to do to get sales and to keep the items in your inventory sort of freshened in the eyes of eBay. And I just have countless examples of items that have been sitting for 6 months without anything and no sales and nothing, and then I end it and relist it, and then it sells 2 or 3 days later. And so I think it's a very positive thing to do. There's certainly nothing that's going to negatively impact you as a seller if you do this. Your seller rating, it doesn't matter. I mean, at the end of the day, eBay wants you to list as many things as possible, even if that means ending and relisting. So there's definitely no negative impact to it, and I think there's only positive that comes from it. So you can do it in bulk. You can use the bulk editing tool. You can mass end all your listings or a chunk of your listings, and then in bulk relist it. And I can do my store sits at about 1,000 listings, and I could end and relist the entire thing in about 2 minutes. So it's really a quick and easy thing to do, and I think it's definitely worthwhile. So you should do it. All right, that was the last question, but thank you so much for asking all these questions. Hopefully you found the answers interesting and insightful and helpful. We'll see you next time. Thank you.